Hi there, guys. Welcome back to Craig Houston Talks, the podcast. And I welcome a repeat guest who's now on for the third time. It's Dave Sharp. And in part one of Dave Sharp podcast, we spoke about his horrific childhood, where from before his first birthday up until his 16th birthday, he was in the care system and was a victim of some horrific sexual abuse. And part two, we spoke about Dave's life after being coming out of the care system, where things didn't get much better. He was homeless for long periods of time. He managed in the short space of a few months to fall in love, get married. His wife was pregnant and unfortunately passed away while pregnant. That obviously played a massive part on his psychology of his life. He then found God and became one of the most renowned sexual abuse, child abuse campaigners in the UK. And that's where we'll pick up the story in this part three of Dave Sharp's life story. So, Dave, welcome back to the podcast. How are you?
I'm fine. It's been a few weeks. I think we both needed to recover. Been a lot of various feedback to yourself and to me. And it's kind of clear, Craig, that I think you're recognising yourself that a lot of people don't want these stories to come out. So on behalf of the child abuse community, I thank you for sticking by us and being persistent. One or two attacks were really serious, but this is why we're chosen. You know, as a Christian, I believe I'm destined to spend my life talking about child sex abuse and my own experiences. You know, I wake up every morning and I just thank God that I'm in this position. But for someone like yourself, you're getting to understand that this subject is silenced and has been in Scotland for over 50 years. And again, we thank you for giving us the opportunity.
No problem, Dave. I think your story is remarkable. It's horrific and it's inspiring, all in equal doses, and that's why I was keen to give you a platform and actually hear and share your stories. And the thing that hit home to me was, out of 100 people that made comment, 99% of them were supportive and shocked by the story and on your side of the story. But you always get that small percentage, 1% or less, that and unfortunately, human beings, that's the ones we tend to listen to and are attracted to, and we've managed to ignore the other 99%. So yeah, it was a bit of a surprise to me that in such a delicate subject that we were talking about, it managed to get some people very angry. And I don't know if it was because it was your story, not theirs, or your story, no others, but it was quite bizarre for me to hear the particularly one that was quite, I don't know, almost preaching on violence verbally is probably the best way I can describe it. But 99.9% of people very supportive, and some of the comments that I've read in response to the videos has been remarkable about yourself and your story. So anyway, if we can start where we sort of left off in the last part, Dave, where you unfortunately we covered, your untimely death of your recently married wife. You lost the child because she was pregnant at the time. We covered your time trying to recover from that psychologically and you finding God. And then I think we stopped the story just as you were starting your campaigning. So could you maybe explain to us how you got and why you got involved in your campaigning after your wife passing away and you finding God?
Well, that's the perfect time, Craig, because one of the things that the doctors said to me when I was in the mental hospital after Alice had died, they said that part of your recovery is you need to report this. Little did I know at that time, I wasn't going to know till a few years later, that I had in fact reported it many times, but I'd never had the courage or I was constantly running away from my past, that I never went back. But in 1998, it was when I first contacted Police Scotland in Fife, and I said to them, I need to report child sex abuse in St Ninians in Fife. And we think Nazareth House last Wed. And the police officer laughed at me. And he said, you're not going to get anywhere. Nothing ever happens in Scotland to do with, and he kind of put the phone down on me. And it was such a pivotal moment. I thought, my God, but I knew I knew these things had happened to me. So that was when the campaign started in 1998. And within a couple of years, I used to travel down to London a lot, outside Scottish, the English Parliament. And whenever I heard of any demonstrations, protests, I would turn up and speak about my case, and I'd got to meet more and more Scottish people. Then in 2010, when the Pope came over to these shores and he didn't apologise, that was when a fire lit in a lot of people. That's when more and more people started speaking out. And again, around about 2010, 15, the internet was getting more for people like us who, obviously the internet had been around a bit. But I started making more contacts and things. And then I started breaking out and coming back up to Scotland. And I think it was 2011, my first one, when I was standing outside the Scottish Parliament with a banner. And I stood there for 3 days, and I can't remember. I'm not even going to guess how many people came forward, but this started a process where I would just turn up at the Scottish Parliament, or I would turn up at St Andrew's Cathedral in Glasgow, or I would turn up in Manchester, Birmingham, London, anything to do with the Catholic Church, or anything where I knew where child abuse was being prevalent in care homes. And I started doing this more regular. And then in 2014, when the Scottish referendum started, I stood outside the Scottish Parliament for 10 days with a huge big banner that said, "Forget the referendum, look after your children first." And at the time, I think I told you this before, at that time I didn't have any money. I was on the dole. I had a breakdown in 2012 because I started finding more and more people dying, and I started losing people. People started disappearing. I didn't understand. And then when I started hearing from other groups and other individuals in drug and alcohol units, the picture started developing that, when the rehabs were shutting down, Craig, these things became more prevalent. More and more people started dying. I remember I had a breakdown in 2012, but I carried on. And in 2014, what I used to do is when I came up to Scotland or Edinburgh or Glasgow, I would book into these hostels, the backpack hostels. And in most of these hostels, you would get what's called long stay. Did I tell you this before? I told you about this.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if you told me on the podcast. I think we had this conversation over the telephone, but I don't think we put it to the camera.
These were homeless people who went into the hostels. They got a free bed in exchange for doing work, doing the cooking, the cleaning, stuff like that. So I used to get in and say, "Can I get a bed in the long stay?" And I'd get it for a couple of quid, and I could get a tenner and stay for 5 nights. So what I used to do, I used to be in these rooms, and they weren't very nice. It didn't smell very nice. But these were guys who had all had a story to tell. Most of them were addicts. Most of them were homeless. And then I would turn up, and in the morning, I'd always say my prayer, the prayer I say every morning: "Dear God, help me to find someone today who needs your support the way that you support me." And when I get back at night time, I used to sit with these guys in a circle, and they'd smoke and drink and inject and do what they wanted. And it was a chance for me to share my story with these people. And after 2 or 3 days, some of these guys had started coming up with me, and we stand outside the Scottish Parliament, just handing out leaflets and telling people about the child abuse inquiry, or asking for a child abuse inquiry, and talking about our stories and sharing about things. And within 10 days, we had like over 100 people who'd came forward. Certain people, I mean, you remember the scene, the yeses and the no banners and the screaming and the fighting, and Scotland was in uproar for this, whereas we were. I'm not political, Craig, in any shape or form. I'm too busy. I've got too much of a weight as a survivor. So these are the kind of things I started doing, and then I started doing vigils outside St Andrew's Cathedral, asking the Catholic Church to be more involved and speak out more about the sex abuse and the child abuse, and and then by the time 2013, 14, 15, it became too much. So I joined a child abuse charity. I realised I needed help. So I joined this charity, and it worked. It helped me get a lot of the burden out. As I say, at one time, Craig, and on my book cabinet, I had something like 29 candles with names on it. the people I knew that had died, and it was a heavy, heavy burden, and it was happening too much because I was taking everything on myself.
Sorry to interrupt here, Dave. Was this people who had been victims of abuse and then had some sort of addictions and things like that? Is that what was going on here?
Absolutely. 100%, 100%, yeah. And then one of the things I started doing was if I met people, I would make sure, most of them, like myself, have got no family. So it's very, very hard to determine, even nowadays when you get the drug test, no one says, oh, he died of sex, he was a child sex abuse survivor. Everybody's very, very good at disguising it now, eh? And that's one of the things we're trying to change, Craig. But at the time, you just knew if he disappeared, you rang the number 3 or 4 times, and and various other things. We know for a fact that, especially with the Catholic Church, this is part of the thing that I felt guilty about, where we were sending a lot of people to the Catholic Church, and they were getting these non-disclosure agreements, and some people would end up like £500 or £1,000 or £2,000. Now, sorry, Craig, but and I don't mean to label everybody the same, but if you give £1,000 to a drug addict, that's a death sentence. I've been in that situation with the shoplifting and stuff, and then once you spend that, if you've signed an NDA, where do you go from there with your sex abuse, with your childhood trauma?
What you're saying here, Dave, is people would maybe go to the Catholic Church who had been abused, show them proof of their abuse. The Catholic Church would give them a small amount of money to recompensate them and get them to sign a non-disclaimer saying that they couldn't talk about it, and probably stop them any further claims in the future. Is that basically what was happening?
That's been happening for years, Craig. But again, without blowing one trumpet, I've always, and this is what people know me for, I've always gone right in. I call myself a foot soldier. I'm not a campaigner. I'm not very good at speaking. I'm not very good at standing up at events and speaking out. I like to be on the streets and show what's happening on the streets. I was witnessing this. We've all known this has been happening for years, not just with the Catholic Church. All the organisations will do this. But to actually be right there in the front line, seeing this is what I was experiencing. And this again which was leading up to, as I've got a higher profile, then people were starting to say, you need to be very, very careful, because you're very good at your job, but you're exposing a lot of things here that could get you hurt. You need to be really, really careful.
So, excuse my ignorance here. You started campaigning outside the Scottish Government asking for inquiry as the country was getting ready for the referendum. When did the Scottish Government eventually commit to having an abuse inquiry?
It's been voiced for years. I mean, if the truth be known, as far back as 2004, when Jack McConnell made the famous statement that we apologise on behalf of all the survivors of child abuse. Everybody then said, well, why is he doing that? It became apparent that even then there was a cry out for it. But the child abuse inquiry, it didn't start breathing, if you like, till about 2012, 13. That was when and then in 2015 it was announced that we're going to have the inquiry. It's going to start up, and and again, I've said this before to you. I'm not in any way, shape, or form taking all the credit for myself. There was a lot of other campaigners out there.
Which one thing I found peculiar about it, and this was due to talking to survivors of a family of abuse under a football team. They're not going to go down that road now because we're talking about your story, right? So I don't want to end up talking about another issue. But this family, who are very close to, were campaigning on behalf of an abuse victim who's unfortunately no longer with us. And I remember talking to them, and they were stunned and upset that the Scottish Historic Abuse Inquiry had 2 exclusions, and one was religious groups and one was sports groups. What's your understanding of why those exclusions were there in the first place, Dave?
Why was it what, sorry?
What's your opinion? Why do you think they were excluded from the actual inquiry, when you would imagine, with my limited knowledge of the subject, that majority of the abuse would have came under religious groups and or sports groups.
Well, I mean, it speaks for itself, Craig. 95%, at least 90% of institutional abuse is the Catholic Church, you know, in Scotland, you know, and most of the football abuse is by Celtic, which is the link with the Catholic Church. The link's there, and again, you've got to realise. And again, I get in trouble for saying this because I try so hard not to be politically motivated, because I've got many friends who were abused by Celtic. You know, I'll give you a good example later on, and people who didn't want to come forward, who were just too ashamed, but also because they didn't trust the lawyers in Scotland. But yeah, the Catholic, again, you've got to remember, again, a very famous Catholic whistleblower came forward, said a few years ago now, he was a Catholic priest for 23 years, and then he was a Christian brother for 11 years. And this guy, he's an American, he became a whistleblower, and he stated that Scotland is one of the few countries left in the world where the Catholic Church is more powerful than the government. Because if all the survivors were to come forward of just in-care abuse, we spoke about this, it would cost in excess of £700 million. Well, for one, the Catholic Church don't want to pay that. And of course, the Scottish Government, and when you say the Scottish Government, I'm very keen here, and I always have been. When you say, I would change that, not Scottish Government, the Scottish political system know that they can't afford that, because it would have such an impact on not only on the economy, but also the police and the social services.
You spoke to me about something that we've not spoke about on the podcast, but we spoke about privately on the telephone. And you were explaining to me that the Scottish Government already has a process in place to support financially victims, right? But there is an amount of money available for people who were in the care system, full stop, regardless of even if they were abused. Could you tell me a wee bit more about that and how that works?
What, the redress scheme?
Yeah, I'm not sure what name you gave it, but you were explaining to me on a phone call.
The redress scheme. See, this again. You've got to go back to 2012 and 13 when the Scottish political system, i.e., the Scottish Government, when the pressure was coming on to have the Scottish Abuse Inquiry, naturally the natural progression would be to have a redress scheme after it. It is a natural progression in anywhere in the world, not original to Scotland in any shape or form. But even as back as 2013, what we were saying then, survivors and campaigners were saying, if all the survivors were to come forward, this would cost in excess of £250 to £300 million, which was an awful lot of money then. And the politicians knew this, Craig. So when they were getting prepared for the inevitable child abuse inquiry, that they knew as well that it would be followed by a redress scheme. And they knew, because, again, it all falls back to the point of what Lady Smith, the inquiry chair, said in one of her closing statements. For 50 years, Scotland turned its back on its children in the care system. You all stood back and left out. What she didn't say was that while we were being abused, our families were being threatened and our communities were being threatened by the authorities and the Catholic Church. Now, that's why for all these years, between 60 and 75% of all those in addiction or homeless or in prisons were sexually abused as children. And 95% of them were in the care system. And nothing's changed. Now, the fact that we have never dealt with that has put that kind of funding up to over £750 million. So when they started the redress scheme, they devised this bill, and we looked at this bill, 80-odd pages, whatever, but there was one thing missing, one very important thing missing that nobody in the Scottish Government even thought of, or if they did, they thought that we wouldn't notice it. Not one single penny was allocated to an awareness programme to look for and find all these thousands of people who went through the care system in the last 50 years. And even to this day, we're still asking, why is there no awareness campaign Now, even just before I went into prison, which we'll run into quickly, even before I got into prison last year, I went up to Fife and I stood in Glenrothes, Kirkcaldy and Leven. You can't find anybody who's even heard of it.
Yeah, so what you're saying is they put a thing in place to give not just those that survived abuse, but anybody who'd been in the care system an amount of money, but never told anybody and never put any mechanism in place to allow them to tell folk. Is that basically where we are?
Yeah, because what they did, they said this: every single person who was in the care system will be eligible for £10,000.
This
what
is
you've got to remember as well, Craig, is you just finished the child abuse inquiry. Now, we know I've been in trouble for saying this, but not so much now because people are now waking up. The child abuse inquiry is, I mean, whether you're in Australia, America, Ireland, everybody knows they've ballsed this up. Excuse my language, but the cover-ups are so obvious to see for any. Because here's the thing, Craig, with the child abuse inquiry, all you have to do to see where they're covering up, all you have to do is to look at the child abuse inquiry website and see what's not in there and compare it with all the there's 4 or 5 big cases came up in Scotland previously. Operation Winterton, which is one that St Ninians where I was, 70 odd men came forward, and other ones as well, and all the Nazareth houses and all the other stuff. But it's what's not in. And I've said it as well. When I went up in front of the child abuse inquiry, I was taken up a week before, taken in a room. I was showed these records and I looked at these records and I said, "Where did you get these from? I've been looking for these all my life." And they said, "Oh, we got them." I said, "Well, can I get a copy?" "No." "Can you tell me where you got them from?" "No." Now, when I appeared in the inquiry, there was no mention of Savile. There was no mention of trafficking. There was no mention of taking into these rich places. Everything was kept under. I was guided, and that's why a lot of people, there's no aftercare for the child abuse inquiry. So they had to take that same attitude into the redress scheme. They've got to make sure as less people as possible come forward. Now, so, in a place like Scotland,
this is a bit that really blew my mind when we spoke about this on the telephone. Shane, so to get money from this redress scheme, what period is it we're talking about? When do you need to have been in care?
It's from 64 onwards, up
right
to
up
2014, I think it is. Up until 2014.
Okay, so basically on a 50-year window, yeah?
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
How many children would have been in care in the whole of Scotland within that 50 years, roughly?
It's got to be nearer to I don't know. This is another thing, Craig. There is absolutely no studies on this whatsoever. When you talk to people in universities and people who like do it, I get people phoning me all the time. "Dave, can you help me with this?" And help you with, yeah, of course I can. I'm always glad to help people with what I know, but I don't claim to know everything, Craig. But I mean, when you're talking 50 years, when there's over 150 care homes, that's hundreds of thousands of children.
And every single one of them, regardless if they were abuse victims or not, are eligible for a £10,000 payout.
Yes, because what the redress scheme did, as per other countries, it sets itself at a maximum of 100,000. Again, sorry, I didn't veer off deliberately there talking about the child abuse inquiry. I was trying to relate it up to the records. Because what happened with the redress scheme is that everybody's entitled to £10,000, but depending on the level of abuse that you suffered, it can go up to 40, to 60, to 80, and 100. But when you go there and say that you were sexually abused, you have to provide the records. And this is why we're getting so many tragic. I stopped. It was getting too much for me because I've heard these stories for 25 years now, Craig, and you know I'm getting old now. I was 65 last week, and we're hearing so many stories of people that are just they're going in there with good intentions and thinking that they're going to get looked after, and they're not. They're not.
So let me just to clarify my own head. Someone like yourself who was evidently abused in care, if you go to this redress scheme, you would have £10,000 without any proof, just the fact that you were in care.
Aye.
But if you want to claim any of the higher amounts, are you, does the liability for proof lie with you then?
Aye,
And what
99% of the time.
how would you be able to, or how would anybody be able to provide any proof of abuse? What would they accept?
What you're trying to say is, how do you get hold of your records? All the records are
aye,
gone.
but your records alone are not going to state that you were abused, I take it, because these people didn't start filling out forms every time they abused children, right? So the only thing that you would probably be able to prove beyond doubt is the fact that you were in a care home.
Yeah, and that's what's called the records of entry.
Yeah.
Now, even in some excuse me, even in some cases they were trying to deny them that. But if for example, in my case, right, I know I was in the care system for 16 years. I know that when I was, I'm not going to go over what we've been over before about the nuns lying to my father that I'd been adopted out.
Yeah.
But I know for a fact I was fostered out in London, Irvine, Bathgate. I know I was taken to these places. Now, when I got my records, none of this was on it. Nothing. They don't say, the records don't say he was sexually abused by Father Ryan, Brother Ryan, and taken away over to Ireland to be abused by these paedophile rings, or taken into the forests in Scotland. None of that's there. But your record of entry, at least, will get you £10,000, and everybody has to have the records of entry. But again, I told you this as well. We know that there's something underneath the Scottish government. Again, I'm not claiming to know everything. You have to bear in mind, part of my problem, and this is one of the problems, Craig, is that when the Scottish government come out and make a statement about child sex abuse, what they do is they say, "Oh, we've been talking to survivors, and this is what we've told, and this is what." But what they do is they talk to a very, very small percentage, two groups. Now, if those two groups don't share the information that they've got, then how is people like myself expected to know what we are saying is true, or if what we are saying is going to help? And that's always been my problem.
Yeah, so is there any place online on a Scottish Government website or something that this redress process is documented, that people who have been in the care system can at least go and get the information and start the ball rolling on a claim?
Let me put it another way for you, right? How many drug addicts do you know? I mean, some people I know, even me myself, I use a computer to read the papers, you know, and if you're going in and showing somebody, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? I've got the concentration span, Craig, of a hyperactive chimpanzee. When you go into the Scottish Child Abuse, the website you're talking about, if you're looking, most of it's 60, 80 pages long. That you haven't, most people that even, if somebody comes to me, I would refer them to a child abuse charity. Contact a child abuse charity, get them to sit down with you and explain the system to you. Because if you contact the redress scheme itself, which I've done a few times, I'm talking about dozens and dozens and dozens of people. I'll get people phoning me back saying, "Thanks very much, mate. What an effing waste of time that was." You know, there's so many barriers, Craig.
But do you know anybody that's even had the £10,000 payout because they've been able to prove that they were in a care situation?
I know at least 3 that have had the 100,000. Let's be a wee bit positive for a reason.
Yeah. So there are, but the easiest thing to prove is that you were in care. The hardest thing to prove is you were in care and abused, right? So for the vast majority of people, they'll probably not be able to get to the point where they can prove and get a higher payout. But at least if they got something in terms of even this £10,000 for just being in the care system, at least that would be a benefit to some. So can they go onto the Scottish Government website anywhere and find this information, or do they need to go through a charity?
You'll find it,
but that's just, that's fine, because that means I can then find it and I can publicise this and I can take to social media and encourage people to come forward, whether they were abused or not, and get some sort of redress for a situation that they were in.
Do you know my last wish? Do you know anything I've got left in my life to what's the word I'm looking for? To serve. The last thing I want to do now, I would give anything, and again, without being childish, if I won the lottery tonight, I would hire 100 people I'd hire 200 people. You know that statement Hamza Yusuf made last week on the stage? We'll go to every town. We'll go to every city. We'll go to every village. I would do that. I'd put my words into action, and I'd go and I'd hire people, put letters through the doors, notes through the leaflets through the doors, tap the door and say, are you aware of the Scottish Child Abuse Redress Scheme? Did you also know, Craig, that if for example, my brother died, Jean, my sister-in-law, if the next of kin can also claim the 10,000.
Right, okay. Yeah, so that's interesting to me, Dave, that this recourse thing's there. So I'll look into that myself and maybe start sharing it on social media just to raise awareness of it, because there'll be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people out there who weren't care, that are abused or not, that will not know anything about this process. And with the amount of people we're talking about, it's no surprise to me that the Scottish Government maybe don't want to enlighten many people to it. So when you started your campaigning, Dave, and obviously you sound as if A, you were very active, and B, a reasonable amount of success during it. What was the high points and the low points of your time as a campaigner?
Well, one of the high points was in 2016, Archbishop Tagliacari came out. What happened is Dr. McClelland, A. McClelland of Church of Scotland, he did the McClelland report, which was about the Catholic Church abuse. But what he did was he caught everybody out, and he published it 6 months earlier than it should have been published. And what happened was that Archbishop Tagliacari had to rush in front of a camera and make a full apology to all the survivors. Now, that same day, I contacted the Catholic Church. Now, they knew who I was because I'd done a number of campaigns outside the church and elsewhere, and in England as well, and in Northern Ireland. And no, I don't think I'd been in Northern Ireland at that point. No, it was later on. But anyway, and I contacted his office. I said, if he's really serious about being an apology and wanting to work with survivors, will he meet me? I said, yeah, okay. So I got a meeting, which is the first. So I went up to St Andrew's Cathedral. I don't know if you know, outside there's a church, and then next door you got that big black windowed tainted building, which is the headquarters of the church. And I went in there, and I never forget, because it was really, really strange, because he turned up like he was meeting the Pope with the full robe and all.
Aye.
And I thought, is that to intimidate? That's just so strange. Yeah. And I sat there, and I got a 2-hour meeting with him. It was all over the papers and everything. But what came of that, Craig, was I said, listen, I want 3 things. I said, if you're really, really serious, I said, I want you to set up counselling for survivors, because there's no counselling service, Christian counselling service for survivors that can get proper help and direction into proper counselling. You're very good at silencing people, but how about turning this around and in an act of reconciliation and work with us, so that we can show that Scotland's different. I mean, I had this crazy dream that I thought that was going to work, you know. And I said to him, I said, all my life I've carried this weight of feeling guilty for what the church did to me, because the church does that, Craig. When you get kicked out of the care homes by the Catholic Church, they divorce you, you know, and they know full well that you're going downhill. You're going to end up in a life of misery and destruction, self-destruction and addiction, you know, and you carry this weight of guilt that it's all your own fault. And I said to Archbishop Tagliacari, I said, I want to be invited to a church service that you're doing yourself, so that I can come in and make some kind of peace with the church for the abuse you did to me. Mm-hmm. And I said, the third thing I want you to arrange a meeting with me and the people who abused me, the Irish Christian Brothers. And I said, I want you to do it within 6 weeks. And we sat and talked, and I had all my medical records with me. I had everything with me, all my amount of times I'd been in the mental hospital, amount of times I've been in prison, all the overdose. It was all there. It was all there, Craig. And I said, I'll wait for 6 weeks. And in 6 weeks, he never got back to me. So I prayed to God, and I said, how do I deal with this? What do we have to do to get through to these people? Why won't you reach out to us? So I prayed about it. And God said to me, right, I want you to go up to Glasgow, and I want you to build a 10-foot cross. And I want you to stand outside St Andrew's Cathedral, chained to the cross, for 10 days. And I thought, is this the devil? And it wouldn't leave me. It wouldn't leave me. I said, I can't do that. I said, I'll get killed. But this voice kept on speaking to me. He said, you're going to do it. I said, but, no buts, no ifs, no buts. And eventually I contacted Police Scotland. Now, I because of the campaigns I'd done, I knew Police Scotland. I'd stood out. I'd stood in George's Square and other places, and I was on first name terms with the police, because every time I did a campaign on George's Square, I'd make them aware, and they would be officers undercover, and they would come by as I was standing there, and they would say, walk by, and just, Dave, are you okay? Just watching you. Don't worry, we've got your back. So I was well protected, as with any campaign, religious campaign. But so I decided, and I phoned the police. I said, you're going to, Dave, are you back on drugs? I said, no. I said, no. I said, I've got to do this. I said, we've got to do something. We've got to go the extra mile here, because so many survivors are in addiction, so many are dying, and nobody cares, and I was at my wit's end, and it wasn't just about me, Craig. It wasn't just about my own case. It was about, and let me add this very quickly as well. Let me be very clear here as well. By that stage, I'd gone to Brown Street, Church of Scotland headquarters in Edinburgh, and I sat, just like I did with Archbishop Tad Bucharry, I went to Brown Street and I sat with the Church of Scotland. I was in this room with 4 or 5 people, and with the collars on, and I spoke to him. I said, what are you actually doing? And he said, look at our website. Here, this is the counselling services we offer. And that's the truth. So I'm not anti-Catholic or pro this and pro that. I went to Church of Scotland, and I had dinner with Dr. McClelland 2 or 3 times, and he said, we love what you're doing, because you're bringing this, you're keeping this alive, you're keeping it in the public domain, and you've got our full support. And yeah, I met Dr. McClelland 2 or 3 times, and went for a meal in Edinburgh, and told him, kept him updated. And as I say, he invited me into the headquarters, and they were showing me all this stuff. I thought, this is what we need. But the Catholic Church was completely different. So I phoned them and I said, I'm coming. Oh yeah, they didn't believe me, basically. So one Sunday, I turned up outside St Andrew's Cathedral with a leaflet, and it said, my name's Dave Sharp. I'm a survivor of historical child sex abuse by the Catholic Church and the Irish Christian Brothers. For 20 years, I've been trying to get them to listen, to help us, to come forward and support survivors. And there was 100-odd people at the service, and I gave each one a leaflet as they went into church on the Sunday. And I said, I'm going to be standing across the road from tomorrow morning. And there was a couple of old women there, a couple of old guys. And I remember one guy came in and said, this is exactly what we need. Good luck. And I thought, yes, that's what I need. That's exactly what I'm looking for. And I honestly believed, Craig. I believed in all my heart that God was guiding me. And I knew that he would have my back. And the next morning I turned up in a 10-foot cross, changed it to one of the pillars, and I taped it to the thing, and I chained myself to the cross, and I stood and I waited to see what would happen. And then sure enough, within minutes, people coming from everywhere, all cars going by, people coming up, people coming out of the church. Some of them, 1 or 2, is, you shouldn't be doing this. Is not the way. And this, 99% of them were coming out and saying, you know what, this is exactly what we need. Can I stand with you? I said, of course you can. And the effect of what happened during that 10 days was incredible. Sometimes I would be standing there, Craig, and there'd be guys that come up on bikes, and they would circle me, and I thought, here we go, I'm going to get stabbed. This is it. I'm going to get stabbed, and he's going to run. But if I didn't get stabbed in the first 10 seconds, then I realised this guy wants to talk to me. And I'd say, you all right? He'd say, Dave, can I talk to you? And then again, another story about abuse. There was one guy, this is one of the ones I talk about. There was a guy who came up, and he says, Dave, can I talk to you? My name's Jim. He says, my dad was abused by Celtic Boys Club. He says, he very rarely talks about it, but he's seen you. He's read about what you're doing. This is probably day 2 or day 3, because at this time I was in the papers. And he says, can you give my dad a phone? My dad would like to talk to you. I said, of course I would, aye, no worries at all, aye. And I phoned the guy, and the guy said, he said, I've tried to get help, I've tried, and nobody listened. And I said, well, listen, I can introduce you to a counsellor. I can introduce you to, I'm not interested in nothing, not interested in anybody. I'll talk to you and that's it. He said, like a drink at the weekend, that's mainly time. And since then, Jim, for nearly a year, Craig, sorry, I have my phone on 24 hours a day. And about 2 weeks later, 1 o'clock in the morning on a Friday, hey, hello, he's steaming, it was Jim. They bastards, they this, sorry for my language. And I said, it's okay, mate. I said, yeah. I said, it's all right. I know how you feel. I've been there. I said, it's a lifelong struggle that we've got here. You know, we'll get a reward in heaven where you'll be able to find peace with your family and all this. And that went on for nearly a year, Craig. And I never, ever referred him anywhere because I didn't. He said to me, and then it wasn't just till, was it just before the pandemic? Jim phoned me. Jim and said, Dave, he says, just to let you know, my dad died.
Oh.
And I went, oh, I said, all right. He said, listen, thanks for everything. He says, you were a good help. And that's a typical story. Yeah. People that just won't come forward. And then on the other hand, Craig, as you know, you've already experienced it, you get the other survivor who attacks me because I'm doing something that they can't. I'm explaining to you the both sides of how survivors react to someone like myself. And again, I'm not taking all the credit to other people, but there's just nobody does what I did. Nobody did what I did, you know. And all these different scenarios, and all these Catholics were coming forward. Listen, and every day, cups of tea, rolls, and, you know, bags of crisps. I couldn't believe it. And the biggest message I got was that the Catholics were saying to me, we have to live with this as well, Dave. Mm-hmm. We're the ones that are blackmailed, or you know, whatever it is you want to call it. You know, they're survivors and victims themselves because they're brainwashed. They're brainwashed into believing.
I think it's important to understand the difference between the Catholic Church and Catholics, because it wasn't these people who sit there and are very staunch in their beliefs. You know, they're Christian people who just have a slightly different view in Christianity for other Christian people, but they are Christians, and they go to their church, and you know they get a lot of solace from that, and it's their way of having a relationship with God. So, and it's not them that abuse people. It was people within their church. And again, I'm not sure of the percentages, whether it's 99% or 1%, but it's not every single person that even puts a collar on to represent the Catholic Church that abuses children. But there will be a percentage, and it might be a high percentage, it might be a low percentage, but it's not even the whole Catholic Church. Universally, I think, unfortunately, that it is a high percentage, and that's, you know, that's down to the church to deal with. But it's not the wee woman that goes to church rigorously every Sunday to show her faith and, you know, has great belief in Catholicism. It's not her that molested you. And these people will probably, they're human beings, and they'll under, a lot of them, some of them won't, but a lot of them will understand what went on, particularly you and thousands like you, was wrong, and to be done in the name of their church. They'll have a lot of remorse about that. So, you know, I think it is important that people understand the difference between the Roman Catholic Church and Roman Catholics. You know, that's in my head.
And that's why the biggest gift I had to give to these Catholics was my testimony about how God had turned my life around, and Jesus Christ was now my saviour and guiding light. And I was standing there representing Jesus Christ and everything he talked about, putting your children first. But at the same time, I was the biggest enemy to the church because I represented everything, or I stood for everything that they had put me through, what hell looks like, that they had created. Let's be clear about that. They created this hell for the children. So, and these people...
I know that with your Christian values, you might think hate is maybe quite a strong word to use, right, for your own personal opinions. But do you have, what do you feel as somebody that was abused by men of cloth, and we've spoken about this on the telephone, and more importantly, what's your opinions about the Roman Catholic Church done? My opinion, for what it's worth, is that these paedophiles are attracted to any organisation that will give them access to children because they need to fulfil their own horrific desires. It just so happened that a lot of them were, attracted to the Roman Catholic Church. It's not to say that the only religion that would ever have paedophiles in it. That's not what I'm saying. A lot of people were attracted to it. Do you have any anger or hatred towards the church itself for, the way it covered up and things like that, or do you just blame the individuals and see them as separate entities as such?
Well, I had the answer halfway through, but you just said it. You just said the word that changed my life around. Through all the therapy I've had throughout my life, Craig, the biggest thing I had to deal with was my anger.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I hated and despised, terrified of anything to do with the Catholic Church for years and years and years. And anything in authority, any figures of authority, and people in positions of power and all this. And one of the biggest thing I had to deal with through therapy was my anger. I remember I was up in Inverness, and I used to go there quite regular even when I was in Bible college, and I used to go to these places, and you've been in a room, and the room was a living room with a 3-piece suite and a television, but it was all balsa wood. And you go out and express your anger and get it all out your system and dealing. But then we go into forgiveness. So when you talk about tell us how you feel about the Catholic Church, Dave. Again, this connects with me ending up in prison and being accused of violence, of actually hitting somebody or even threatening somebody. When I became a Christian, Craig, it's two worlds. Forgiveness is a personal, very, very personal thing. I had to learn to forgive, and that was very, very hard. Now, what we haven't spoke about is, and I've had so many people ask me, what happened to the young guy in the bed next to me? We haven't brought a resolution to that, have we?
No.
You remember?
Is this a young boy that Ryan told you he'd killed and he hadn't killed?
Yeah. Well, what happened was, in 2012 or 13, when I first came forward to the papers, and it was in the Daily Record, I wanted to report a murder. And James McCurr, the Daily Record reporter, he said, Dave, we're getting dozens and dozens of phone calls. We're getting lots of people telling us things that you've told us off camera, like getting put in coffins, other things, and things that you've said. But he says, there's one phone call you have to take, Dave. You have to take this phone call. I said, go on. I said, that's fine. I'll do that. So this guy phoned me, and he says, Dave, do you remember me? I said, no. He said, listen, there's something you need to know. You've got it all wrong. I said, what do you mean? He says, he wasn't murdered. His name was Joe. He says, Joe committed suicide on home leave. He was 12 years of age, and his family wouldn't believe that he was being abused by the Catholic Church. And I remember I fell to my knees, Craig, and I thought, I prayed to God, I says, how on earth do I deal with this? All my life has been a lie. Every single relationship. So you can understand that the back of my mind, all this addiction and social outcast and personality disorders and all this thing, the horror of a life that I've had was based on one, not just the abuse as well, but this lie that these people told me. So how could I deal with that? And a voice says to me, what would Jesus do? And I sat and thought, I said, well, Jesus would forgive. And he said, that's what you've got to do. So I learned how to forgive. And I did. I forgave the people who did that to me. And that allowed me to breathe. That allowed me to be myself. That allowed Dave Sharp, the person, to grow. But also the Dave Sharp that I knew that was carrying trauma. And it's like I said to you before, Craig, God gives you the tools to deal with these things. But you're left to put, when I wake up in the morning, you know, I pray every morning for guidance. I don't have to pray every minute of the day. I know God's there, and all I have to do is read my Bible and follow what Jesus would do. And I try that. So when you ask me about the Catholic Church, I talk about reconciliation. But at the same time, I'm going to be honest with you. When we see currently now that talk about the Catholic Church could actually end, they're selling churches and all the rest of it. And, you know, the Pope's just spent 3 years going round the world, 3 or 5 years, trying to show the world what a great person he is. There's nowhere else to turn. So now sit down and take responsibility for what you've done.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's but I can't get angry, Craig.
Yeah, you know, I understand that. Well, I try to understand that, right? Because I think that would be quite a difficult thing after having the 16 years of abuse that you had. But what do you think the Catholic Church, and again, I'm not going to apologise for talking about the Catholic Church, but I'm just going to point out that we have to talk about them because we're talking about your story. Now, you weren't abused by a football club or any other organisation. Your abuse was at the hands of the Roman Catholic Church. So though people think that we're doing this to have a go at them, or no, we're talking about it because that's what happened to you. Now, do you think that they've done enough to date for what happened going back in time? And do you think that organisation has changed in any way, or do you think these things are still going on today?
Every single day now. This is why I keep saying, I'm not the only one saying this. All over the world now, Craig, all around the world, lights are coming on. Survivors are coming forward by the thousands. Priests are coming forward. Bishops are coming forward. And people are saying that all these lights, the more lights that come on around the world, the more people are looking to Scotland and saying, why is it still so dark there? The Catholic Church is getting more and more exposed. And this is why when we talk about, you know, I talk about when I get to the gates of heaven. When St. Peter says to me, did you put my children first? I say, yes, I did. And I've not got a problem with that. I told you the story about my wife and my mother. God said to me, you do things my way and I'll make sure you get to heaven and spend it. I firmly believe that. And every day I live my life according to that. But when you talk about when you get to the gates of heaven, you're going to be asked, do you want to take the baggage of those people who did those bad things to you? Do you want to have that baggage when you get to heaven? I don't. So I've tried. I've sat down with Archbishop Tad Carey. I sat down with Keith O'Brien, Cardinal Keith O'Brien, the one that turned out to be homosexual. Remember him?
Yeah. The one that disappeared. They went to Ireland. Either went to Ireland or the Vatican. I can't just remember, but he was in Edinburgh 1 minute and away the next. Exactly.
So to answer your question, every day. I mean, as I say, I'm not a member of it. That's not the truth. Somebody pulled me up about this before, because in the last podcast I told I'm a member of over 50 to 75 child abuse charities around the world. I'm involved with them, and I know them, and every day you hear stories. I've got especially with SNAP, Survivors Network, people abused by priests. That's an American one. I'm an ambassador for them. There's also ECA, End Clergy Abuse. These are worldwide organisations that have branches in every country in the world.
And is the abuse still happening today, though?
Absolutely. Every day it's coming out.
Is it at the same levels as it was in the 70s, 80s and 90s?
Well, ask it another way. Will it ever go away?
No. I think expecting it to disappear entirely. I think we need to put our cards on the table here. Paedophiles exist. So, if we're going to have paedophiles for eternity, then unfortunately we're going to have abuse for eternity. To make it go away and make it zero, I think is a pretty wholesome target, but I think it's an unachievable target. Because if 0.5% of the male population are paedophiles, then 0.5% are going to commit abuse. Right? That's just unfortunate, right? So to make it zero and expect the Roman Catholic Church to go from the levels it was at when you were abused to zero today, I think it's never going to happen. But is it the same levels as it was back then, or has it come down some over time?
You would have to say it's come down. But also saying that, Craig, I still believe, and I can lay it into your heart, and I'm looking you in the eyes, and I'll lay this on your heart, mate. Scotland's a small enough country, right? If we all put our heart and souls into this, if we created an environment where people can feel safe enough to come forward, which we can't seem to do. If we could, we're such a small country. Any kid coming out of care now, today, we can grab them. And if they have been abused, we can guide them and make sure they get their life back on track. We are a small enough country to do this. So why is it even now today, just today, 75% of all the kids in prison, Holman and what have you, 75% of young offenders in prison now were sexually abused as children, and 95% were in the care system. Does that answer your question? I cried my eyes.
That's right, and that's people. Now, if you're in Pullman, then does that mean you're under 22, 23 years of age?
Right. 21.
So yeah, right. Okay, so we're talking about people, I don't know, it's early 20s, right? So that's people who, if they come out of the care system, have probably come out it within the last 4 or 5 years. And there's still that's a big number that are being abused within the last 5, 10 years then. That's pretty scary. And I think it's important that we say just now, though, the vast majority of care homes that these kids are coming out of that have been abused, the minority of them will be administered by the Roman Catholic Church these days.
No, a lot of them are private.
Yeah.
A lot of them are private.
Yeah. Wow. And is that sexually abused or physically abused or both?
Mostly sexually abused. And it's worth saying, Craig, and I hope I haven't covered this before, but this is the most important bit, right? And I experienced this when I was in prison, because I've been talking about it for so long. Between 60 and 75% of people who were in prison were sexually abused, mostly in the care system, right? Most of these people have spent their whole lives going through the revolving doors. Now, when they come out the care system, some of them 10, 20, 30 years ago, come out the care system, as soon as you try and speak about it or expose that you were sexually abused, the first thing they do is get you on medication. You're put straight onto prescribed medication, and then they want you just to disappear.
Yeah.
Now these are the people who end up going through these revolving doors. Now when they get to adulthood and they have children, what happens when they go into prison? What happens to their children?
It's got a knock-on effect. It's going to repeat.
Straight into the care system. And this revolving door. And again, I don't know if I've spoken to this before about the lawyers. I know one guy who's lawyer, he gets a Christmas card every year to his lawyer. He was sexually abused as a kid, because what happens is they go from being labelled as a child sex abuse survivor to a career criminal. And they give up. The survivor gives up. And when you go into prison, like I did last year, and I sat in that prison, and they took me in this room and he says, Dave, we know who you are. You're a campaigner, but you can't talk about child sex abuse in here. I said, excuse me? What are you talking about? He said, Dave, we've got too many. We don't have the resources to deal with it. And then when I went on the floor, every single day, a guy's coming up to me saying, you Dave, sir, and I was abused here and that. And I said, what, how long? I've been in prison all my life. And I was abused, and mostly the care system. So what I'm saying to you, Craig, going back to the original question, is it still going on? We are a small enough country, mate. If we had the right people with the right heart and found a way, I don't do the lottery. I seen there £113 million. I could spend all that. I could spend every bit of that and creating this environment that we're talking about, and creating the family tree when kids come out of care, finding out what their needs are, from family to expectations to visions to dreams, and getting them back on track. But at the meantime, creating that environment where paedophiles will feel too scared to touch it. I'm getting emotional again. To touch your children. And you can't tell me we can't do that. I will never, ever believe that as a country we can't do that. But everybody's terrified to talk about it.
Yeah, maybe I'm looking at it from the wrong way. I'm saying that unless we find a way of eradicating paedophiles, which I think is probably impossible, then we're not going to prevent abuse. But what you're saying is true, that you probably could, because if you made it easier for them to get caught, they might be less likely to carry the act. Because being a paedophile and having these thoughts in your head is one thing, but then turning it into an action is another. And if for too long, when you were in care, it was so easy for them to turn it into actions because there was no comeback on them. Whereas if we had a society where if a child was abused on a Monday, they had some way of getting it sorted by the Tuesday, then that would be a deterrent for paedophiles would still exist, but paedophilia abuse could possibly reach zero. Now I get that now, what you're saying. Something that I want to talk to you about, David, before we go on to the subject, I think it's worth that we point out that it could possibly be touching things that are still relevant in a live police inquiry. So for everybody's protection, that includes yours, mine, and the other people involved, we need to be careful what we talk about and how we handle it. But can we now move on to the horrific story where you ended up in jail recently and how that came about?
Remember, since 1998, I've not been in it. Probably before that, I've not been in any trouble with the law. I turned my life around, Craig. I had an amazing story to tell. I even campaigned on the other side of the world. Gave my testimony all over the world. And then in 2017, after I met the Catholic Church, I was awarded a payment. And as soon as I was awarded a payment, I started my own group called SAFE, Seek and Find Everyone Abused in Childhood. Now, I devised a leaflet that we could use to encourage people to come forward, to have their own voices heard. There was a couple of testimonies in it, including mine. And on the day the public inquiry started, we stood outside, about a dozen of us. We got a piper to play Highland Cathedral, and we did a minute's silence. The next day, we stood outside George's. We stood on George's Square for 3 days. Dozens of men and women came forward, told us their stories. We then progressed on. We went to Kilmarnock, Greenock, Edinburgh, Dundee, Gay Pride, Walk for Suicide. And again, as I said earlier on, people started saying to me, Dave, you've got to be really careful because what you're doing is very, very powerful. But a lot of people want to silence you. Now, the charity that I was with, Wellbeing Scotland, we were working together, but I was a client. That's very, very important to say. I was a client of this charity. They were getting paid by the Scottish Government. So when we did stood on the streets of Scotland, encouraging people to come forward, we were the survivors sharing our testimony. I was telling people how Jesus Christ had turned my life around, and how I'd now been out of trouble for all these years, you know, and I'd been clean for 25 years. And it's an amazing, amazing story, Craig. And then the charity, they were counselling people. They were the counselling, you know, and they were telling me, you can't come in here without us being with you, which I didn't understand at the time. And that was fine. And then very quickly, they started saying, well, we can bring our lawyers out to help you. So, and I thought, this is amazing. So we've actually got a situation where we're standing on the streets of Scotland. We're the survivors sharing their testimonies. We've got counselling people, a child abuse charity where we can refer people to, and a law firm that can offer legal advice. And you know what, Craig? It worked. Within the first year, for example, the Child Abuse Inquiry in 1 year had spent £25 million. And less than, from what we know, because the figures never get released, but less than 200 people had come forward. I spoke to the lawyers and I said to them one day, I said, how many people do you think had to come forward? He said, well over 200. And I said to the Child Abuse Charity, I said, how many survivors do you think, this is in 18 months, 12 months, how many survivors do you think have come forward? She said, over 600. And I was like, that's amazing. Mm-hmm. This works. It worked. But again, everybody's saying to me, you've got to be very, very careful because these people don't like that you're getting all the attention. And I didn't get it, Craig. I was naive. You know, I had people coming up and saying the papers were all wanting to come to Dave Sharp, not to them or them, and they didn't like it. And then one day, completely out of the blue, I was taken in an office by this woman, the chief executive.
Before we go on, Dave, again, because of something you told me before we hit the record button, I think it's probably wise, just for your own protection, we don't mention A, the charity, or B, the women. Does that make sense? Right, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know. Because I don't, because we've got, as I say, new evidence, and we know the case is still ongoing. We're keeping it going, so it's important we do that. But yeah, I was taken in a room. I said, we've been told that you threatened somebody. You have to leave. I said, what do you mean? Who? What? No, we don't have to give you the information. Leave, and you never talk to any survivors or any of the staff in this charity ever again. Go. And I thought, hang on a minute, no, you can't do this. Yes, we can. On you go. And I went home and I thought, what's going on? Now, at this point, as well, it's worth pointing out that we were also working with Police Scotland. I was having lots of meetings with the police who wanted to devise a leaflet that we could use on our stalls. There was also other organisations, government-run organisations like the National Confidential Forum, which is where the bottom of Bath Street, a place where survivors could come and take their testimonies, so they could have a national record of abuse. And I got on great with these people, and they asked me, said, Dave, do you want to give? I said, I'd love to give your leaflets out. So we had other organisations, government-run organisation, Future Pathways, which is another organisation that helps survivors out with financial needs, holidays, and various other things. But anyway, what used to happen is this woman used to turn up, and she used to say, "What are you doing with them?" And she'd rip all the leaflets up. And I thought, what are you doing? But why are you doing this? I didn't know. I didn't understand. And of course, then she said, you have to leave. And I thought, well, this is madness. But what had also happened was, just before this, another organisation appeared on the scene. Now, I was asked to speak at a conference in Dunblane. And this woman was telling me, she says, we're going to join up with these. I said, what do you mean join up? You're government run. Well, we're going to join up with this group. And I want you to come and give your testimony and meet them. So I went to Dunblane Community Centre and I gave my testimony, and I met these people, and they were, I mean, seriously, they were wacko. They had this plan, they were going to stop the child abuse inquiry, stop people coming forward to the police, and they only wanted people to come forward to them and the solicitors. And I spoke to him. I said, what resources have you got? What experience have you got? Honestly, no, it's fine. This woman, the child abuse charity, she's going to be one of our directors. And I'm thought, hang on a minute, this woman was in a meeting with me 2 weeks ago with Police Scotland. Now she's in a conference telling people not to go to the police. I'm really confused here. And then and now I don't know what's happening. And then she says, you need to leave. So I phoned the police and I said, listen, this has nothing to do with me. I'm still keen to work with you. And they went, oh, we know, it's okay. We're aware of what's happening. We know what's happening. We believe you. Don't worry. And then within a week, I received a letter, which is now the basis for the court case, that they no longer wanted a working relationship with me. And if I contacted anybody or said anything to anybody, they would take me to court. Now, I didn't work for them. I was a survivor. I was a client. They were getting paid to look after me. And I refused. I got phone calls from even including police that I knew. Dave, don't you let them do this to you. You've worked too hard. Other charities were contacting me saying, Dave, this woman's done this before. She's been in a lot of trouble for doing things and saying things about people, blah, blah, blah. So I didn't give in, Craig. I refused, and I had a meeting with the other two groups I mentioned, Future Pathways and National Confidential Forum. They took me in a room in Edinburgh and they said, listen, you have to see this through. You have to contact the OSCAR, the Scottish Charity Commission, who deal with all the charities in Scotland. It's very, very important that you tell them what's happened here. And he said, we'll give you an advocate. We'll also give you support, counselling to help you through this period, because I was triggered really, really bad, Craig. You imagine taking all those years to turn your life around and expecting to end up in heaven with my wife and my mother. Then all of a sudden, this person's come along and made these accusations about you. Living with abuse is hard, Craig. Living with false allegations is a completely different world. So I have to phone OSCAR, which is the Scottish Charity Regulator, which I knew that they had dealt with this charity before as well, you know. And then at the same time, I've got all the support. People tell me, don't give up, don't give up. And then I got a phone call, Craig, about 2 weeks later. And it was my friend in Dundee. And my friend says to me, she said, Dave, why did you not tell us you're up in Dundee? We'd have come and worked with you. It was a drug charity. But why didn't you tell us you were up in Dundee? I said, I'm not. He said, but all your friends are here, and the charities here, and the law firms here, and all the survivors, and but they've got another name. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, they've set up a stall here, and it's called something else now. I won't mention the name, but what they've done is got rid of me 2 weeks ago. Now they've come out doing the exact same thing that I'd set up on their own under a new name. But
when was this, Dave? How far back are we going just now?
How far? This is 2018.
Okay, so just pre-COVID.
Yeah. Yep. So now what they're doing is they're referring all the survivors come forward to the law firm. So now we're talking.
Yeah.
It's all about money. It's all about money. But what happened, Craig, is I started receiving all these phone calls, and it was frightening. I would get women that I'd referred to these people, right? Old ladies that I'd referred to these people would be phoning me up and saying, Dave, I've just had a phone call saying that I've got to give these people my testimony that I gave to the child abuse inquiry, and they want to know more details, and I don't know who they are. And I thought, what? And they were saying, oh, they're from the law firm or from this other group. And I went, that's illegal. So straight away, I phoned the police.
Excuse me a second. Why is this illegal? Is this because they told one group and that one group's passed their details over? Where's the legal part of it?
When you give your testimony over to the police or to the child abuse inquiry, that now becomes, that's the property of the state. Now, what they're saying is, what these people were saying is they wanted them to cancel it and pull out of there, but give a full statement to these lawyers and this other group. And I phoned the Scottish Government, I phoned the police, I phoned the children, and they said, oh, that's illegal, leave that with us. But nobody got back to me. But what would happen is it happened again. So I phoned this law firm, I texted them, and I said, what the hell are you doing here to these women? You're asking these women to go over all these details of their abuse. Oh, it was a mistake. We didn't realise they were already with us. We thought they were new clients. I went, that's a lie. Some of these people I referred to you over a year ago. Then I started getting other phone calls. People on the phone, is that Dave Sharp? Yeah, you effing this and you effing that. What? Calm down. What was? You told me when I met you in Greenock, you told me that you were only going to be charging 10%. Why have I now been told by this law firm that they're charging 25%? Now, I said, listen, I don't have anything to do with these people now. Yeah, I heard it all before. You're just one of these Robin so-and-sos. It's all coming on me, Craig. It's all coming on me. I'll give you another example. When I was with this charity, right, when the survivors, more survivors were coming forward, they were taking me in an office and saying, we want you to be a befriender. I said, oh yeah, I'll do that. I was exhausted. I was campaigning all the time and I was hearing all these stories and people dying. I wasn't in a good place. And then they said to me, we've got sex offenders. We want you to be a befriender for a sex offender. And I went, oh, okay, right, okay. But I said, listen, you've got to give me the proper training because I've never been down this road before. You need to be very, very careful. So I met this guy with my key worker. And I won't get into detail. Let's leave it at that, right? And then this guy started phoning me and saying, I've not heard for this charity for 3 months. If I don't get a phone call or something, I'm not going to be responsible for what happens next.
This is a
sex offender.
Abuser, aye.
Somebody who's been abused in childhood and then went on to abuse or got involved is on the sex registers, right? And I'm like, what? I'll be honest with you, do you know what I had today? And I told the police this. I was so scared of what this guy was doing. I was jumping on a train from Northampton up to Glasgow, taking the guy for dinner and counselling myself and then staying overnight and getting the. I even took this guy down to London for the weekend because I was so terrified that he was going off the rail. I didn't know what else to do, Craig. I really didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to get rid of him. in a way that, you know, and I couldn't say to him, listen, I'm no proper quality. When I say he became a mate, I was the only. He was telling me he got beat up once on the bus where he lives, and I won't mention the place. They found out because there was a thing in Glasgow, something happened, and there was about a dozen of them on the paper, and his face was one of them, and he couldn't go out. He can't use his internet, all that stuff. You know, the restrictions they have, and it was terrifying. Absolutely, it wasn't until the pandemic, or just before the pandemic, that we lost touch, and it was such a relief. But there was also a lot of women who were calling me, saying things that I couldn't deal with, Craig, because I wasn't properly qualified.
So how does this lead to you being charged with a criminal offence? How does this all tie in?
So because I wouldn't give up, right? Because I wouldn't give up, then we knew that we were making roads because apparently what I get told, and I don't know if this is the truth or not, or how much truth is in this, but I was told that the police, other child abuse charities, and various other people were putting pressure on this charity. Come on, stop this. Put this guy out of his misery. For God's sake, show us the evidence. If he has threatened somebody, then that other person must have got counselling. Also, if he threatened somebody and he's in your care, why did you just dump him? There's too many questions here.
Right, so the accusation of you threatening somebody was about 2018, 2019. Is that when it's meant to have been happened, right? And where do we end up? When do you end up getting arrested?
So it was just before the pandemic, 2020, just before the pandemic, I was at home, where I am now, and my door went 8 o'clock in the morning, and I went to the door, totally unexpected. There was 2 police officers. They said, we're from Falkirk Police Station. You need to come with us. I said, what, sorry, what? You're okay. You're not in any trouble. We just want to have a word with you. I said, where are you taking me? We'll take you. I'm in Northampton, right? He said, what it is, we'll take you now up to Dumfries, talk things over, and then we'll bring you back. You don't need to bring any toiletries or change your clothes or any money. You don't need anything. Just come. And I went, hang on. I said, listen, come on. I'm not stupid. What's going on here? What have I done? What's happening? Give me some. No, and then the guy changed tone. I said, can I get in and have a wash? Can I get the toilet? Right there. And then I said, listen, I need to phone my I told you already, my landlord's an ex-police officer. I said, can I phone my landlord? No, grab my phone. And then it changed. Come on, just get ready. Come on, we're going in 5 minutes. Right, something's not right here. Something. So they took me out into the car, drove up the motorway, and because I talk a lot, Craig, my CPTSD, it kicked off. I've gone into hypertension now, and it's just. And I remember at one point, one guy turned around and said, "My God, you don't have talk a lot, don't you, man?" So laughing at me, and I said 3 times. 3 times I said to them, Craig, because I knew something wasn't right. I said, listen, if you're going to put me in any cells or you're going to do anything here, you have to make sure there's an appropriate adult. I said, I can't, even now I'm 64, 65 years of age, I have to have candles all around the house because I can't have the dark. I go straight into a coffin. And I said, I told them all, I said, you've got to be really, yeah. And then we got to Dumfries. As soon as we got to Dumfries, everything changed. Right, come on, get in there. Just everything changed. And it was just horrible, mate. It was just the most horrible experience. And they took me in a wee room, and they went. I mean, there was a police officer woman standing with a thing asking me questions. But at this point, I've now gone into hypervigilant because, you know, I've got to protect myself. Something's not right here. And then they took me up and they took me to the sergeant's desk, and the two poles on each side. And the sergeant said to me, right, okay, first of all, we're going to take you for your fingerprinting. I said, hang on a minute. I said, I've not been charged with anything. What do you mean? I said, right, okay, that's it. Listen, so I took my hearing aids off, and I said, right, that's it. Sorry. I said, I'm not going to do or say another thing until I've seen a doctor or you take me to the hospital. That's it. I'm not doing anything more. And right, if that's the way you want to play it, the 2 guys grabbed me, took me into a police station, says, right, take your clothes off. I said, what? Take your clothes, strip me naked. gave me one of these suicide vest suit things, and they left me there for 16 hours. Now,
Wow.
this is about 1 o'clock in the daytime, right? At 8 o'clock, the door goes. And I know the police were coming in and out and looking at me and that, but I didn't have any hearing aids on. I didn't hear or I could hear the door, obviously. I'm not 100% deaf, Craig. But the door went, he said, right, the doctor's here. Come on. And they took me in this wee room, and I says to this doctor, I said, listen, see, before you do or say anything, can I just ask you to Google Dave Sharp, Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry? And he did. It was an Asian guy. And the very first thing he said to me, have you been allocated an appropriate adult? I said, no. That was the very first thing he said. You need an appropriate adult here.
This is a doctor.
This is the doctor.
Right.
So he took me out. I was in the cell, and they 2 police officers were sitting in the cell. Right, you ready to talk? I said, listen, I don't want to talk to you people. I don't know what's happening here. But okay, they walked out. And that was me for 1 o'clock in the afternoon up till 6 o'clock the next morning. The door, and they didn't have a drink of water. Didn't have a drink of water, nothing. And then 6 o'clock in the morning, the door went, and this guy, the sergeant guy, he's right, and threw a bag in, plastic bag with all my clothes in it. Right, get them on. You're leaving in 5 minutes. You're going to Alloa. What are you talking about? You're going to Alloa, Sheriff Court. What? I said, listen, I've not had a wash. I've brushed my teeth, putting on all clothes, cut my hair, nothing. Come on. I said, I haven't even had anything to eat or drink. He's right, okay. So he went away, came back with one of the microwave dinners, sausage and beans, piping hot. Couldn't eat it. Took some of the tea. Then they put the handcuffs on me. I said, what's going on here, man? Took me in the meat wagon, goes up to Alloa, put me in this cell. I'm sitting there, and it's about 12 o'clock now. And a guy came in, he says, you all right? I said, all right. I said, mate, I've not had anything to eat for 24 hours. I've not had nothing. And he's right, okay, come back with a pot noodle. So I ate the pot noodle. And then a couple of hours later, he said, right, you're going to see the duty solicitor in a minute before you go to court. Right, okay, I've no idea what's happening. So I went to this wee bit with the mirror, to the glass partition. This guy there, the lawyer, and he said, right, he said, there's 3 charges. I said, sorry? He said, 3 charges. He said, you're charged with resisting arrest. I said, what, from where? What? Yesterday, you refused to have your fingerprints taken. I said, but I was told I wasn't being arrested. So how can I be, for not being arrested, how can I be charged with resisting arrest? He said, the second charge is sending menacing text messages. He said, and this is what he said, this is clearly what he said. He said, but don't worry, I've looked through all the texts and there's nothing threatening, because I don't swear. So there's nothing threatening, nothing to worry. He said, but the third charge is a bit more serious. I said, what's that? Now, this is 21, right? He said, in 2018, in Dundee City Centre, you assaulted this woman, threw her to the ground and attacked her. I said, sorry? What are you talking about? He said, that's the charge. You assaulted this woman, you threw her to the... First thing I thought is, well, there must be CCTV. If I did this in the town centre, there's got to be CCTV, so I'm not really got nothing to worry about here. This is her doing the same thing as she's done to other people. And he said, you'll be going to court in a minute. I went back to my cell, and then I went to court. And I couldn't really hear Craig because it's a big court, and I heard the opposition or the prosecution saying, we're opposing bail, this is a serious charge. And this guy's done it before. In 1979, this man was involved in a fight or a violent attack, which I was attacked. I was in a breach of the peace, basically. And there was a knife involved, but it wasn't mine. That was it. Apart from that, all my crimes are shoplifting, breach of the peace, and I've been put in prison for that and not paying my fines. There's nothing violent about me. And then he said, right, I got bail. So I went home, and the police took my phone and says, we're confiscating your phone. I said, that's fine. I said, because I've always said you can go into my computer, you can go into anything. I am who I am. I carry a lot of trauma, but I'm a good person. I think I'm a good person. And then I got home, And then I just stayed just over here. I sat there all night. I couldn't sleep. I just sat there, and then the first thing in the morning, I went to my doctor's, and I said to the doc, I said, "Doc, you're going to have to put me back in the mental hospital because." And I told him what had happened, and he went, "I don't believe this." I said, "Yeah," because obviously I had a few. What I haven't mentioned since the threatening, I tried to commit suicide twice because I couldn't live with the false allegations, Keith. Craig, sorry. I was at Preston train station and something happened in my head. Something happened and I started, it was like, I don't know, somebody took over my body and I walked over to the edge of the track line and I stood there and I was rocking myself forward and then a train came by and I walked up to the edge where the ramp bit is and I jumped down a stage bit and then somebody grabbed me and I said, no, and I came to. And I kind of said, no, I was just interested because the police were involved as well. And I managed to talk them out of it. And I remember texting the woman who was my key worker. I said, you need to help me here. You need to sort this out because I'm losing my mind. This is sending me crazy, having to deal with all these things that you're accusing me of. And then so anyway, that was it. And I had to wait and wait and wait. And then just a few weeks, a month later, pandemic hit. So now we're in the pandemic. So everybody's doing all their thing and everybody's locked down and all the rest of it. So I'm phoning this lawyer. I said, listen, can we arrange a Zoom meeting? Can I see the evidence? Can I see the statements? I'm a bit busy just now. I'll talk later. And the guy kept on ignoring me. Even after a year, nothing happened. I phoned, I'll be honest, I emailed every senior police officer in Scotland. And I said, listen, if you speak to so-and-so, so-and-so, this is all police officers that I've worked with, Keith, in the child abuse unit. They'll verify. They'll tell you, I wouldn't do something like this. I don't have it in me. And again, I was just ignored. Everybody ignored me. And then it came to the court case, and I went to court, and the lawyer didn't turn up. He had COVID. So I had to, something very bad happened. I ended up nearly jumping off a bridge. It was just, I was losing my mind. And then I kept on contacting this lawyer and I said, listen, when are we going to meet? You have to tell me what's happening. And because nobody would get back to me, Craig, I ended up, I think it was in July or something, I decided I'm going to go up to Falkirk Police Station and I'm going to stand outside the police station for 5 days and 5 nights. And that's what I did. And I stood there and the police officer coming out, I said, listen, you came to my house. You arrested me and you've never even showed me any evidence. I've never been interviewed. And I phoned this lawyer. I said, listen, I'm in Falkirk, because he's based in Falkirk as well. I said, I'm in Falkirk now. I'm here all week. Meet me. Sit down with me and advise me how to deal with this. How we can, you're supposed to be my defence. Oh, I haven't got time. And then on day 4, my phone went and it was a lawyer. He said, I've got good news for you. He says, the Procurator Fiscal have dropped the assault charge. I said, of course they have, because it never happened. It never happened. He says, but only on the condition that you plead guilty to sending menacing text messages. They've also dropped the resisting arrest. I said, because I wasn't arrested. What's going on here? He said, and I said, remember what you told me when you met me, that there was no threatening text messages. So what are we saying here? What are you talking about? What am I pleading guilty to? He said, listen, just go guilty. You'll get a slap on the wrist. And this was his language for the next 6 months. I said, why am I pleading guilty? I don't know what I've done. I want to take this to court, because if I get this in a court, the first thing the judge is going to say, right, you know, if we're both there, first thing the judge is going to say, how did this all happen? How does this all start? I'll say, over to yous. Tell us how this started, because I have no idea. But it never happened.
So by this point, you've not made any plea at all. Is that right?
What, sorry?
You've not made any plea in court at all? Or did
None.
you plead not guilty to the original charges?
I plead guilty all the way. But even when they dropped the assault charges, I'd never ever sat with the lawyer and said, we never met. I met him once.
When you eventually got convicted, right? So when you end up back,
what do you mean? What do you mean convicted?
I thought I thought you'd been found guilty. Eventually,
of sending menacing text messages.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
so,
what am I convicted of?
No, I know that, right? I'm trying to get there. So
Sorry.
when do you next visit the court?
Right. So it's another 6 months, 8 months, and then the date was set for the court. Now this lawyer, I'm contacting this lawyer saying, you're telling me you go guilty, but what am I going guilty for? What have I actually done? You haven't sat down and showed me what I've done.
Yeah.
Listen,
And
I sent a lot of text messages, right? And I sent a lot of emails. I was talking about, and I'll be frank, and this is all on record. I wanted to go up to the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry and stand outside the inquiry with an oil drum and put 1,000 matches, sellotape 1,000 matches to my body and set myself on fire. If that was what it would take for these people to tell the truth. This is the kind of thing. There was also, Craig, very quickly, you know the one in New Zealand when the massacre with the Muslims?
Right. Dave, I'm conscious of time, right? And your story is the
Right.
most important thing. Nothing that happened in New Zealand or Australia, right? So can we get to the bit where you get to court eventually? Because you must obviously end up back in court. Because we've only got about less than 20 minutes left of recording time. So I want to make best use of it.
Got you. Okay. Again, so what happened was the court date was set. And again, this is the second time. I've never seen this lawyer for nearly 2 years. And we gets to the court and Alloa Sheriff Court. And I'm sitting at the back of the court and I see this guy, but I don't recognise him because he's got grey hair now. He's different. I didn't realise it was him. And he says, right, come with me. So he took me in a wee room and he said to me, he says, right, what you doing? Are you pleading guilty or not guilty? I started crying. I had a shirt and tie on and a cardigan. I took my tie off and I said, listen to me. What am I pleading guilty to? You haven't showed me anything. Right, if that's the way you want to do it, okay. The guy turned round, walked into the court, and I didn't hear it all. Basically what he says to the judge is, he's pleading not guilty. Please go easy on this one. He's had it a bit harder than most. He's had a really tough childhood. Nothing about my campaigning, nothing about anything. Just go easy. And then I'm not sure what I did or said, but it was something like, hang on a minute, when do I get to speak out? When are you going? Then the judge went, Mr. Sharp, be quiet in my court. And I went, but I haven't done. And then the judge says, right, turn to the prosecution. He says, right, what was he originally charged with? What is the original charge here? And the prosecutor woman said, oh, this is serious, Your Honour. This guy grappled a disabled woman who's a pillar of the community. And he grabbed her and threw her onto the ground and beat her up. This woman had to stay at home for months. Well, we found out since 2 weeks later, she's up in Dundee. The time we were in Dundee, committed assault, very serious charge, but it wasn't proved. And I said, because it never happened. And then the judge went, that's it, I've had enough of you, 60 days in prison.
So what was your 60 days for? Contempt of court or for any of the charges?
Sending menacing text messages.
Was there a judge only? There was no
no, nothing,
jury in this?
nothing, no jury. It was a sheriff court. I didn't have a chance to speak, give my side of the story. None.
Right. So you get initially 3 charges, but eventually just charged with sending menacing texts.
Aye.
And during the court proceedings, what evidence did the prosecution give to prove that you had sent messages and menacing texts?
Nothing.
Right. I'm going to.
From the moment I went into the court, I'm a survivor of child sex abuse. I'm carrying trauma. Therefore, I must be guilty. That's the way it works in Scotland, Craig.
Right. I need to become the sort of devil's advocate here because I need to play both sides of this story. Right.
Okay.
So, without sitting in that court, without having any court documents in front of me, and I think like many people who will watch this, they'll be scratching their heads saying, how can a judge find somebody guilty without any evidence being presented to the court? That's just bizarre.
That's why, see when he said 60 days in court, 60 days in prison, do you know what I did?
Fainted, probably.
Peed myself.
Oh, man.
Swear on my mother's grave, I just peed myself. I couldn't understand what is going on here. Why? And this lawyer, this guy's never, ever, ever met me, apart from in a police station, in a court, and I'm begging him for over a year, please, at least show me the statements.
No, I get that, and I can understand the lawyer just not doing his job right and not sharing, because he would have had all the evidence. You've got to give disclosure. You've got to give the defence the evidence that you have that you're going to present to court, right? So the lawyer must have had evidence, because that's just the way things work, right? But the bit I'm struggling with is that this whole court process took place without a single shred of evidence being presented to a judge who's in turn found you guilty. Now, is it, and again, don't take this personal, Dave, I'm just trying to remain as balanced as I possibly can. It doesn't mean I don't believe you. It just means I'm trying to
I know.
balanced here. Is it possible that the evidence was presented in court, but because of the way your head is through all the abuse, that you maybe just can't remember that part of the proceedings, or have forgot about it?
There was no deliberation. There was no conferring. There was no bits of paper or speeches. The only person that made a speech was my lawyer to say, "Go easy on this guy. He's had it a bit harder than most." This is like this is what happens in the court system with survivors of child sex abuse. They're treated worse than criminals.
But regardless of somebody's background, the way a court works is the way a court works, regardless of what happened to you before then, right? Whether you were abused or no abused doesn't mean the court process changes. And surely surely a judge must look at evidence to enable him to make a judgment. Or we're always looking at it as a charge and deciding in the face value of it whether you're innocent or guilty. So there must have been evidence presented to that judge, or there's no way he could have made a judgment. That's the bit that I just find totally bizarre.
Let's go a bit deeper on that. Let's go deeper on how the judge makes a decision. Let's look at the trauma. Let's look for a second. And this is why the Scottish system is so cruel. And I've spoken to 3 psychologists and police officers all over England and all over. You look at it from this perspective, right? 16 years in the care system being sexually abused, 20 years homeless and addiction, then losing your wife, carrying all that trauma. At what point do you decide if this person goes off the rails for whatever? Even if I did do it, Craig, surely to God, there must be a process in place that would say we need to do a psychiatric report on this guy.
Yeah, and that's a totally separate issue. But
yeah, that didn't happen either.
No, but let's just take that aside for a minute. Whether it happened or whether it didn't happen doesn't mean a judge can make a decision based on no evidence being presented to him whatsoever. Surely he must have been presented something, or how is he possibly going to make a decision?
So then, Craig, I wish to God, and I told you this before, I wish to God you'd have been in that prison, and I'll go and tell you now what happened, how the prison officers reacted, how they deal with this kind of thing all the time. So what happened was they took me out to court. I'm in my police thing. They got in the van, all that stuff, took me into the Shotts prison. The guy said, "Are you feeling suicidal?" I said, "Yes." I said, "I don't believe it just happened to me." They took all my clothes off again, put me back in one of their metal suits. They put me in a single cell, and they left me there for 5 days and 5 nights. Now, see, every night with the screaming, it was the exact same screams I was hearing in the children's homes. Every night when I was in that cell, I slept under the desk in the police cell where I slept when I was a child. Remember I told you about the mass with Ryan? I said, and the officers would come in the morning and say, "What are you doing?" I said, "No," and I couldn't explain to them. But every time the door went, Craig, I thought I was going to get raped. And then after 5 days, they took me up and they took me into this room. Now in this room was the big boss, the chief, what have you, with a white shirt. And there was 2. Oops, you there?
Yeah, I'm still with you.
My battery's gone down. What's happened there? Yeah, there was 2 mental health nurses and social workers and that. And this chief guy said, "We know you. We know what's happened." And one of the guys said, "We're fed up with us. We're fed up with the way that you guys are being treated like this by the justice system." And then a day or so later, I was in the room with just the 2 mental health nurses, and the mental health nurses were saying to me, one of them says, "I follow you. I actually follow you on Twitter." And she says, "I followed everything that you talk about." And she says, "Everything you say is right." She says, "See here, we're dealing with people that are in and out of prison all their lives, and we're not allowed to talk about child sex abuse." I mean, how the hell are they going to get healed then? How the hell are they going to recover? And then again, from then on in, as I say to you. And one of the guys who wants to go to court, this is a prison officer, is that I would come and make a statement. He kept on pulling me out of my cell and take me in a room. He said, "Can we go over this again? I can't understand this. Just like you're doing now, Craig." He's gone, and he says, this is happening all the time. I said, but when have you ever heard that anybody been put in prison without ever being interviewed by the police or ever been interviewed by the lawyer? He said, "I've never heard that." He said, "But we've got so many people who, years ago, when they were kids, this thing was happening. We had no idea that it was still happening now. And everything I've been talking about all these years, God was putting me in that position now to show everybody this is the way the Scottish criminal justice system treats survivors."
Yeah. See,
It's more than cruel.
this is something, Dave, that I want to look at more in depth myself, right? And I don't know if you've got it, but I'm quite sure that the court transcripts must be available somewhere for your case, right? And once we're finished the podcast, I'll get as much details as I can off you about where it, the court and the dates and whatever. And I'll try and get a hold of them, because I think, I don't disbelieve you, by the way, so what I'm about to say next don't take personal, but I find it hard to believe that happened in a court of law in Scotland, where it just doesn't make sense. I mean, law is based on common sense and common law and logic. And that just doesn't make sense to me whatsoever, that a decision can be made by a judge without any evidence. I think the way the lawyers treated you up until you got to court, I think, has been a bit despicable, that he's not went over the evidence that he will have had. He has to have, because of disclosure.
I've still never seen the statement. I've never seen any statement.
Your lawyer, right? Originally, you were charged with 3 things, right? Which were resisting arrest, menacing text, and assault, right? So your lawyer must have at some point been given that evidence through disclosure and the evidence that they were going to produce at court.
I asked them dozens of times, Craig, to show me
it. That's a separate thing, right? That's just sounds like a lawyer that wasn't very good at being a lawyer. But when you walk into that court, the way you've described that whole process to me is there has been no evidence even presented to the court.
No.
So no. I'm struggling to, and you pled not guilty, right? So I'm struggling to understand how a judge could come to a verdict without that, and I need to look into that myself, right? Yeah. So I mean, it's horrific.
And you know another thing, Craig, and this is important as well, because I didn't know this till the day of the court, because the lawyer never told me. You know, when I said about the judge turned around to the procurator and said, "What's he originally charged with?" Do you know what she says? That the woman said, "This happened on the 18th of April 2018. This guy picked this woman up, threw her down and assaulted her, this poor disabled woman." Yeah. Well, hang on a minute. Wait a minute. Hang on a minute. Yes, I was in Dundee the 18th of April, but the 18th of April is my birthday. And on that day, I remember all the survivors and the rest of us, we were all in the Premier Inn Hotel, and they all bought me presents and they bought me a cake at night time. And I remember that well. Now, if I'd have done what they said I did, that woman said I did in the daytime, surely I wouldn't be so evil as to just discard that and then carry on and have a birthday party. Because
I imagine there are people that are that evil. They could do that, Dave, right? But I would imagine when you were in Dundee City Centre, where this allegation of assault took place, it was at some sort of event that you were having in the city centre, where there would have been people there from even your group would have been at this thing in the city centre. The bit I find a bit curious is, if let's just pretend for a minute the assault did happen and it happened in front of these people, and you assaulted and put to the floor a disabled female, within hours later you're all back in the hotel, and these same people that witnessed that were giving you gifts and celebrating your birthday with you.
Birthday, aye. This is what I'm doing. I don't understand. This is what I do. And see, when I was in prison, I got a letter for that lawyer. He said, "You can appeal, but don't bother contacting us after your performance in the court." Wow. So it's important I tell you that if you want to get the transcripts, because other people have other people have done it, and
Yeah.
says, Dave, just what you're saying, other people are saying, this isn't right.
Okay.
You've got every right to shout back and speak up for your own defence, because
Yeah.
nobody's asked you what to give your. This is what I thought all the way along. All the way along, I'm thinking at some point when I go into this court, the judge is going to say, what have you got to say for yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that would be my chance, but it never happened.
It never happened, unfortunately. Well, look, Dave, that's us running, at the end of the recording. Your story is just, every single chapter of your life is more fascinating as the next. You've been in some journey. The fact that you're still here, I think, is testimony to you as a person and your character and your strength of character, because I don't think many people would have managed to cross the hurdles that you have from your beginning to even very recently in the last few years with this case. So, as I say to all my guests, the biggest gift you can give anybody is your time. And you've given me plenty of that through recording these podcasts and the many chats that we've had the telephone, setting them up. So I can't thank you enough for that. And is there anything you want to say just to finish off? I've literally got seconds left.
I live every day. I'm on suicide watch. Been on suicide watch more or less since I came out of prison. It's very, very hard, Craig, to walk about with this black mark across my chest that says criminal, knowing that you're not a criminal. And I'm not a criminal. I'm a very damaged person, but I'm also a good man, a good person. And I never did this. And I'm never going to give up. We've got other statements from other survivors and members of staff that had similar things happen to them. And at some point, all this evidence, all this thing that's happening, especially in the justice system, because the Scottish government and the justice system allows such things to happen where people in positions of power can abuse that power and make false allegations against people, then gaslight them. Now, when you Google my name, it's got stalker. I'm now classed as a stalker, whereas from the start of this process, I was guided by the police, other charities, Scottish government, but this woman was still allowed to go to a court and claim all these things that I did against her, and then play the victim to say that she was being stalked by me, when all these other people who never ever once said, we're going to come to court for you, it never happened. Nobody seemed to take a view that, listen, we need to support this guy. That's it.
Brilliant. Well, look, Dave, I'm sure we'll not be strangers to each other going forward. Your story is absolutely phenomenal, and if you ever need any help, support, or anything at all going forward, you know where we are. And again, just thank you very much for telling and sharing your story with us. So everyone, if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, let your friends know what happened, and share Dave's amazing story. And as I always say at the end of all my podcasts, have a great day. Cheery bye now.
God bless, Craig. Thanks again, sir. Thank you.